The airlock hissed open, and Captain Park Gino stepped onto the Moran colony ship. The air inside was thin and stale, barely enough to breathe. The lights were dead, and he could only see by the beam of his flashlight. The silence was terrible. Then the silence broke. A sound rose from the darkness, a sound that Gino would never forget. It was the crying of thousands of voices, weak and desperate, but still alive. It was the sound of hope that had almost died, but it held on just long enough. The first Moran he saw was a child. She was small, with pale blue skin and large silver eyes that reflected his flashlight beam. She was sitting against a wall, too weak to stand, holding a smaller child in her arms. Both of them were breathing in short, painful gasps. Jino knelt beside them. He did not speak their language, but some things did not need words. He opened his pack and pulled out an oxygen mask. Gently, he placed it over the smaller child's face. The child took a deep breath, and color began to return to her skin. The older child watched with eyes full of confusion and wonder. She did not know what humans were. She had never seen one before. All she knew was that this strange creature had appeared from nowhere and was helping them breathe again. Gino smiled at her. Then he spoke into his communicator. "All teams, begin rescue operations. We have less than 6 hours to save 12,000 people. Move." The crew of the Horizon's Edge spread out through the Moran ship like a wave of determination. There were only 32 of them, and the colony ship was enormous. The task before them was impossible by any reasonable measure. But they were not interested in reasonable measures. Sergeant Lee Doan led the first rescue team. He was a big man with a quiet voice and gentle hands that seemed too large for delicate work. But those hands could carry a Moran child as carefully as they could hold a weapon. He had been a soldier once, trained for violence. Now he found a different purpose. His team moved through the family quarters, where thousands of Moran huddled together in the darkness. Many were unconscious from lack of oxygen. Some were injured from falling debris. All of them were terrified. "Form a line," Doan ordered his team. "Pass the children from person to person. We will move them to the human ship in waves. Do not rush. Do not drop anyone. Every life matters." The humans formed a living chain through the corridors. Moran children, light as birds, were passed from hand to hand with infinite care. The parents watched in stunned silence as their children were carried towards safety by creatures they did not know. One Moran father tried to stop them. He was barely conscious, but he grabbed Dohan's arm with surprising strength. "Why?" He managed to ask in broken universal standard. "Why do you help us?" "We are nothing to you." Dohan looked at him with steady eyes. "You are not nothing. You are people. That is enough." He gently removed the Moran's hand and continued his work. In the medical section of the colony ship, Dr. Han Yunji faced her greatest challenge. Hundreds of Moran were injured, some critically. She had studied their physiology for 3 days, but studying and doing were very different things. Her first patient was an elderly Moran male with internal injuries. She had never operated on a Moran before. She did not know exactly where his organs were or how they connected. One wrong cut could kill him. Yunji took a deep breath and looked at her hands. They were steady. They had always been steady. "Tell me what you feel," she said to the patient, who was barely conscious. "I will follow the pain." She worked by instinct and intelligence, making careful incisions, finding damage, repairing what she could. The Moran's silver blood looked strange under the lights, but blood was blood. Pain was pain. The need to live was universal. 3 hours later, the elderly Moran opened his eyes. He would survive. Unji moved to the next patient, and the next, and the next. She operated for 16 hours straight, stopping only to drink water and flex her cramping fingers. By the end, she had saved 43 lives. Nurse Young Somi found her collapsed against the wall, still wearing her bloody surgical gear. "Doctor, you must rest," Somi said. Unji shook her head weakly. "There are more patients. There are other doctors now. The ones from the Moran ship who recovered. They can help. Please, rest." Yunji wanted to argue, but her body would not let her. She closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep right there on the floor. Pilot Kang Nari flew the shuttle between ships 17 times that day. Each trip carried dozens of Moran refugees to the relative safety of the horizon's edge. Each trip pushed her shuttle beyond its limits. On the 14th trip, disaster struck. A piece of debris from the Moran ship hit her port thruster, destroying it completely. The shuttle began to spin, and for a moment, Nari felt the cold touch of death. Then she grabbed the controls and fought back. Flying with one thruster was like running with one leg. It should have been impossible. But Nari had been flying since she was 16 years old, and she knew her craft like she knew her own body. She compensated for the spin with tiny adjustments, feeling the shuttle respond to her commands. "Control, this is Shuttle 1, she said, her voice strained but calm. "I have lost port thruster. Continuing operations on manual." Back on the horizon's edge, the crew gasped at the sight of her battered shuttle limping toward the docking bay. But Nari did not stop. She completed 3 more trips before finally allowing herself to rest, carrying another 200 Moran to safety. When asked how she did it, she simply shrugged. "They needed to get here. I made it happen." Engineer Shin Boyan worked in the most dangerous part of the colony ship, the engine section. The radiation there was deadly, and her suit offered only limited protection. Every minute she spent there was a minute closer to sickness or death. But the engines needed to be stabilized, or the entire ship could explode. She worked with her assistant, Technician Park Junho, sealing breaches and rerouting power. The radiation made them both sick, their skin turning red and their stomachs churning. "We should leave," Junho said, checking his radiation counter with growing alarm. "The levels are too high." Boyang shook her head. 10 more minutes. "We need 10 more minutes to finish." "We might not have 10 more minutes. Then we will work faster." They finished in 8 minutes. Both of them would spend 2 weeks in the medical bay recovering from radiation poisoning. Neither of them regretted their choice, thought. As the hours passed, a strange thing began to happen. The Moran, who had been too weak and scared to do anything, started to help. They translated for the humans. They guided rescue teams to trap survivors. They cared for their own wounded alongside human doctors. The two species, who had never met before, worked together as if they had known each other for years. Language did not matter. Culture did not matter. Only the work mattered. Finally, after 18 hours of continuous effort, the last Moran was transferred to the horizon's edge. Captain Gino walked through the human ship, now crowded beyond belief with refugees. They filled every corridor, every room, every cargo bay. The ship designed for 35 people now held over 12,000 dot. It should have been chaos. It should have been impossible. Instead, it was organized. Humans and Moran worked together to distribute food and water. Children slept in the arms of human crew members who had given up their own beds. Families stayed together, comforted by strange creatures who asked nothing in return. First Officer Choi Hana found Gino standing by a window, looking out at the Valen Nebula. "We did it," she said softly. "All of them. Every single one." Gino nodded slowly. His eyes were red from exhaustion, but there was peace in his face. "Now we just have to get home," he said. "Can we?" "The ship is badly damaged. We have 12,000 extra people. Our supplies are nearly gone." Gino turned to look at her. He smiled. "We crossed the Valen Nebula. We saved 12,000 lives. Getting home should be easy compared to that. Hannah laughed despite herself. It was a tired laugh, but it was real. You are insane, Captain. I know. Let us go home. The horizon's edge turned away from the nebula and began its long journey back to civilized space. Behind them, the dead colony ship drifted silently, a monument to what could have been a tragedy, but became instead a miracle. A miracle created by 32 humans who refused to let strangers die. 6 months after the rescue in the Valin Nebula, the galaxy was a different place. The change was slow at first, like ripples spreading across a still pond. But as time passed, those ripples grew into waves that no one could ignore. The Galactic Council received 17 formal requests from different species, asking for human assistance with various emergencies. Mining accidents, natural disasters, medical crises, failed colonies. Problems that the old powers had always handled with cold efficiency or ignored entirely. Now, species were asking specifically for humans. Why humans? Asked a council member during a private meeting. We have better technology. We have more resources. We have more experience. The answer came from an unexpected source. The Moran ambassador, a quiet female named Vela, who had survived the colony ship, spoke from her seat at the back of the chamber. Because humans care, she said simply. You send ships and supplies. They send their hearts. No one argued with her. There was nothing to argue about, Captain Park. Gino received the Galactic Medal of Valor in a ceremony broadcast across known space. It was the highest honor the Council could give, and he was the first human ever to receive it. He accepted it not for himself, but for his crew and for every human who had ever answered a call for help. He stood at the podium in his dress uniform, looking out at representatives from 100 species. His crew sat in the front row, cleaned up but still bearing the marks of their ordeal. Sergeant Lee Johan had a new scar on his jaw. Engineer Beat Minji walked with a slight limp from radiation damage. Dr. Han Unji's hand shook slightly, a side effect of the medications she would need for the rest of her life. None of them regretted anything. This medal belongs to everyone who believes that strangers are worth saving, Gino said in his speech. It belongs to anyone who has ever run toward danger instead of away from it. It belongs to the human spirit, which refuses to calculate the cost of doing what is right. He held up the medal, a disk of strange metal that seemed to glow with inner light. I will put this in a place of honor, but I hope I never have to look at it. I hope that by the time I die, there are so many acts of courage in the galaxy that no one remembers mine. The audience was silent for a long moment. Then they began to applaud, a sound like thunder that seemed to shake the very walls of the council chamber. In the months that followed, the crew of the Horizon's Edge became heroes across known space. They did not ask for fame. They did not want it. But the galaxy gave it to them anyway. Lieutenant Kim Sora was promoted to commander and given her own ship, a new vessel called the Aurora's Light. She was assigned to deep space exploration, searching for new worlds and new species. Her first mission took her to the edge of known space, where she discovered a small planet with primitive life forms, just beginning to develop intelligence. She spent a week studying them from orbit, watching them build their first fires and hunt their first prey. She sent her report to the Council, recommending that the planet be protected from interference until the species was ready for contact. In her private log, she wrote, "They remind me of us long ago. Small and fragile and full of potential. I wonder what they will become. I hope they become kind." Engineer Minji became the youngest chief engineer in the human fleet. She was given command of the engineering department on the carrier Star of Dawn, one of the largest human ships ever built. Her innovations in shield technology and power distribution were studied at alien academies across the galaxy. When asked about her success, she always gave the same answer: I just fix things. That is all I ever wanted to do. Navigator Yun Taiho's impossible course through the Valin Nebula became the subject of intense study. Scientists and mathematicians tried to understand how he had done it. They analyzed his calculations, interviewed him extensively, and ran countless simulations. In the end, they concluded that what he had done was mathematically impossible. The course should not have worked. The ship should have been destroyed, but it had worked. And the ship had survived. Taiho was invited to teach at the most prestigious navigation academy in the galaxy. He accepted on one condition, that his students be taught not just mathematics, but also intuition. Not just calculation, but also faith. The universe is bigger than our equations, he told his first class. Sometimes you have to trust yourself. Sometimes you have to take the path that cannot exist, because it is the only path that leads where you need to go. Dr. Yunji retired from active service and opened a medical school that trained doctors in cross-species care. Students from dozens of worlds came to learn from her, studying the techniques she had developed during those desperate hours on the Valaya. Myran colony ship. Her most important lesson had nothing to do with medicine. Every patient is a person, she told her students on their first day. Not a species, not a set of symptoms. A person, with fears and hopes and loved ones who want them to come home. Never forget that. The moment you forget, you stop being a healer. Pilot Kangnari kept flying. She refused promotions and comfortable desk jobs, choosing instead to remain in the cockpit where she belonged. She flew rescue missions, supply runs, and exploration flights. She trained young pilots and pushed old ships beyond their limits. When asked why she did not take an easier job, she laughed. The sky is where I belong. The stars are my home. Why would I leave? The Dorvani Empire, the great military power that had terrorized 3 sectors for centuries, made a surprising decision. They withdrew their forces from all space adjacent to human territory. Their official explanation was strategic reorganization. The real reason was something else entirely. A captured Dorvani intelligence report, leaked years later, revealed the truth. Their analysts had concluded that humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because of their technology or their numbers, but because of their psychology. Humans do not fight to win, the report stated. They fight until they cannot fight anymore. They do not calculate acceptable losses. They do not retreat when victory becomes unlikely. They simply keep going, regardless of the cost. This makes them unpredictable and nearly impossible to defeat. Recommendation: avoid conflict with humans at all costs. The empire that had conquered dozens of worlds was afraid of a species that had only been in space for 4 decades. Not afraid of human weapons. Afraid of human will. But the most profound change was not in governments or militaries. It was in individuals. Across the galaxy, beings who had never met a human began to reconsider their own choices. When they saw someone in trouble, they remembered the images from the Valin Nebula. They remembered 32 people risking everything for strangers. They asked themselves, if humans could do that, what excuse did they have? A Valari merchant, known for his greed, donated his fortune to build schools on pool worlds. When asked why, he said he had watched the human transmission and felt ashamed. A Keth warrior, famous for his cruelty, began protecting refugees instead of hunting them. He said the image of human soldiers carrying alien children had changed something inside him. A Toran scientist, who had spent decades developing weapons, switched to medical research. She wanted to save lives instead of ending them. These were small changes, individual choices. But small choices, multiplied by billions, could change the universe. The Moran never forgot what the humans had done for them. They built a monument on their new homeworld, a towering structure visible from space. At its center was a statue of a human hand reaching down to lift up a Moran child. Every year, on the anniversary of the rescue, Moran gathered at the monument to remember. They told the story to their children, who would tell it to their children, who would tell it to theirs. The story of the species that crossed the stars to save strangers. The species that answered when no one else would dot at the first anniversary ceremony. The Moran ambassador spoke to the assembled crowd. For 10,000 years, Vela said, her voice carrying across the silent gathering, we have asked, what makes a species great? We measured technology. We measured territory. We measured age. We were wrong. She turned toward a small group of humans who had been invited to attend. Captain Gino stood among them, older now, with more gray in his hair. His crew stood beside him, the family that had been forged in the fires of the Valen Nebula. Greatness is not what you can do, Vela continued. It is what you choose to do when no one would blame you for doing nothing. She bowed deeply to the humans, a gesture of respect that the Moran rarely gave to outsiders. You taught us this truth. We will never forget. Captain Gino bowed back. There were tears in his eyes, but he was smiling. 1 year later, another distress call echoed across the stars. A small mining colony had been hit by a devastating earthquake. Thousands were trapped underground. The nearest human ship was too far away to help in time, but the humans were not the only ones listening. A Bain-Kai Valari research vessel changed course. A Keth patrol ship responded. A Taram medical frigate joined them. Ships from a dozen species converged on the colony, arriving within hours to begin rescue operations. When asked why they came, they all gave the same answer: because someone called for help. The human way was spreading. The fire was catching. And across the vast darkness of space, the stars seemed just a little warmer. Somewhere Captain Park Gino smiled. The Galactic Council learned about the rescue 3 days after it happened. The news came not through official channels, but through a transmission that spread across every communication network in known space. No one ever discovered who sent it. Some said it was a technical error. Others believed it was done on purpose. That did not matter how it happened. What mattered was what the galaxy saw. Captain Park Gino stood on the damaged bridge of the horizon's edge, looking directly into the camera. His face was tired and unshaven. His uniform was stained with sweat and alien blood. Behind him, his crew worked at their stations, keeping the battered ship alive. You asked why we went into the Valen Nebula, Gino said. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had made peace with his choices. The answer is simple. Someone was dying. We could help. That is it. That is all there is. The transmission continued, showing images captured by the crew during the rescue. The galaxy watched in silence. They saw Sergeant Lee Doan carrying Moran children in his massive arms, his face soft with tenderness despite his exhaustion. They saw him moving through dark corridors, passing fragile lives from hand to hand, treating each one like the most precious thing in the universe. They saw Dr. Han Yunji operating on alien patients by flashlight, her hands never shaking, even as the ship groaned around her. They saw her saving lives with techniques she had learned just days before, refusing to let her inexperience become an excuse for failure. They saw pilot Kang Nari flying her damaged shuttle through debris fields. One engine gone, her controls barely responding. They saw her land safely again and again, delivering hundreds of refugees to safety through sheer skill and determination. They saw engineer Beek Minji crawling through radiation-flooded sections of the ship, her skin already burning, refusing to leave until her work was done. They saw her smile at the camera with cracked lips, saying only, "The ship needed me, so I stayed." They saw Lieutenant Kim Sora crying as she translated messages from the Moran ship, then wiping her tears and continuing to work. They saw her holding the hand of a frightened Moran child, singing a human lullaby to calm her fears. They saw 32 humans pushing themselves beyond all limits, destroying their own bodies, risking their own deaths, for 12,000 strangers they had never met. And then they heard Corporal Oh Sunwoo bleeding from a head wound, refusing treatment. "Check the children first," he said to the medic who tried to help him. His voice was firm. "I can wait." "They cannot." The medic tried to argue, but Sunwoo simply turned and went back to work, blood running down his face. When the transmission ended, the galaxy was silent. The Valari were one of the oldest species in known space. They had studied the universe for 100,000 years. They had seen civilizations rise and fall. And they believed they understood all things, but they had never seen anything like this. Elder philosopher Kavith watched the human transmission in his study on the Valari homeworld. His ancient eyes, which had witnessed so much history, were wet with something he had not felt in centuries. What word would describe this? His young student asked. Kavith was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "In our oldest text, there is a concept we thought was only legend. We called it the fire that burns inward. It describes beings who destroy themselves to save others, who give everything without expectation of return. We believed such creatures could not truly exist. We were wrong." He looked at the frozen image of Captain Gino on his screen. "These humans possess something we do not understand, something we cannot calculate or predict. They are not stronger than us. They are not smarter. But they have this beautiful madness that makes them throw themselves into fire for strangers." The student considered this. "Is it dangerous?" "Dangerous?" Kavith laughed, a sound like wind through ancient trees. "My child, it is the most dangerous thing in the universe, and also the most wonderful. On the homeworld of the Keth, a species known for their military might, generals gathered to discuss the implications of the human rescue. They were practical beings who understood power and threat assessment. What they saw in the transmission worried them deeply. "They are reckless," said General Thok, studying the data on his screen. "They take risks that no rational species would take. They do not calculate odds of survival." "Is that not a weakness?" asked a younger officer. Thok shook his head slowly. "No, it is their greatest strength. We can predict rational enemies. We can understand their limits. But these humans, they have no limits. They will fight until they cannot fight anymore. They will sacrifice themselves without hesitation. How do you defeat an enemy who does not care about dying?" The room was quiet. "You cannot," Thok said finally. "You can only hope they consider you a friend." The Moran survivors sent their own message once they reached safety. It was broadcast from a refugee camp on a neutral planet, where 12,000 lives were beginning again. The speaker was a Moran female named Alira, who had been a teacher on the colony ship. She stood before the camera with her children beside her, her silver eyes still showing signs of the trauma she had experienced. "We were dying," she said simply. "We sent a call for help into the darkness, expecting nothing. The great powers of the galaxy refused to answer. They said it was too dangerous, too expensive, too much trouble. They left us to die." She paused, gathering herself. "Then the humans came. 32 of them on a small ship with no weapons and few supplies. They crossed a nebula that no one has ever crossed. They worked without rest. They gave us their food, their water, their air. They held our children while we wept." Tears began to fall from her eyes, but she continued. "We asked them why. Why would they risk everything for strangers? Why would they suffer for people they had never met? And one of them, a young engineer named Shin Boyan, gave us an answer that we will never forget." Alira's voice broke as she repeated the words. She said, "Because you called for help." As if that was reason enough. As if there was no other possible answer. She looked directly into the camera. To the humans who saved us, we do not have words large enough to thank you. But we will try. We will spend our lives trying. And we will teach our children and our children's children about the species that crossed the stars to save strangers. The species that answered when no one else would. The transmission from the Moran spread almost as widely as the original rescue footage. Together, they painted a picture that the galaxy could not ignore. In the halls of the Galactic Council, representatives whispered to each other in worried voices. They had dismissed the humans as primitive newcomers, too young and weak to matter. They had been wrong. What do we do about them? Asked the Tehran representative. Nothing, said the eldest council member, a being so old that no one remembered his name. We do nothing. We watch. We learn. And we hope that when the time comes, they consider us worth saving as well. The horizon's edge finally reached friendly space after a journey of 3 weeks. The ship was barely holding together, its hull patched with emergency sealant, its engines running on backup power. But it arrived safely, carrying its precious cargo of survivors. A fleet of rescue ships met them at the border, ready to take the Moran refugees to their new homes. As the survivors were transferred to proper vessels, many of them stopped to look back at the battered human ship that had saved their lives. Captain Gino stood at the airlock, saying goodbye to each Moran as they left. He had not slept more than a few hours at a time since the rescue began. His body was breaking down, but his spirit remained strong. A Moran child, the first one he had helped in the dark corridors of the colony ship, approached him. She was holding something in her small hands. It was a drawing, made with colored markers on paper. It showed a human figure surrounded by stars, with Moran children floating around him. At the bottom, in careful letters, she had written the human word she had learned. Thank you. Gino took the drawing with trembling hands. He knelt down to look the child in her silver eyes. You are welcome, he said. Be safe. Live well. The child hugged him, her thin arms wrapping around his neck. Then she ran to join her family, who were waiting at the airlock. First Officer Choi Hana stood beside Gino as the last refugees departed. What now? She asked. Gino looked at the drawing in his hands. He smiled, a tired smile that held no regret. Now we go home. We repair our ship. We rest. And then? He looked out at the stars, vast and cold and full of possibility. And then we wait for the next call for help. Because there will be another one. There is always another one. Hannah nodded. She understood. Somewhere in the galaxy, beings were suffering. Somewhere, people were calling for help. And somewhere, humans would answer. It was simply what they did. The Valin Nebula was beautiful in the way that death is sometimes beautiful. It glowed with colors that had no names, purple and gold and deep crimson, swirling together in patterns that seemed almost alive. From a distance, it looked like a painting created by some cosmic artist. But Captain Park Gino knew the truth. Behind that beauty was destruction. The nebula was filled with radiation that could cook a human being in seconds. Gravitational anomalies could tear a ship apart without warning. Asteroid fields moved in unpredictable patterns, creating walls of rock that appeared from nowhere. No ship had ever crossed the Valin Nebula and survived. The horizon's edge sat at the edge of this deadly sea, its engines idling as the crew made their final preparations. 14 hours had passed since Gino had given the order, and in that time, no one had slept. There was too much work to do, and too little time to do it. Navigator Yoon Tai-ho sat at his station, staring at screens filled with data that made no sense. The computer had told him that navigation through the nebula was impossible. It had run millions of calculations and found no safe path. Every route led to destruction. But Tai-ho had never trusted computers completely. They were good at math, but they did not understand what humans could do when they had no other choice. He closed his eyes and let his mind drift. He had been navigating since he was 18 years old, and he had developed instincts that no computer could match. He felt the pull of gravity, the flow of radiation, the movement of matter through space. He let these feelings guide him. "I have a course," he said finally. Gino walked over to look at his screen. The path that Taiho had drawn was insane. It twisted and turned through the nebula like a snake, diving into radiation storms and using gravitational wells like slingshots. Any mistake would mean instant death. "The computer says this is impossible," Gino observed. "The computer is probably right," Taiho admitted. "But I think we can do it anyway." Gino smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "That is good enough for me." "How?" "Engage." The horizon's edge moved forward into the swirling chaos of the Valen Nebula. Almost immediately, the alarms began to scream. Radiation levels spiked to dangerous levels. The shields glowed red as they struggled to hold back the invisible death that surrounded them. The ship shook as gravitational forces pulled at it from multiple directions. Engineer Beak Minji ran through the corridors, her tools clanging against her belt. She was a small woman with strong hands and oil stains on her uniform. She had been keeping this ship running for 5 years, and she knew every wire, every circuit, every bolt. The horizon's edge was old and warm, but Minji loved it like a child. Now she was trying to save its life. "Power coupling 3 is failing," she shouted into her communicator. "I need someone in the engine room now." She slid through a maintenance hatch and dropped into the engineering section. Sparks flew from damaged systems. The air was thick with the smell of burning plastic. 2 of her team were already there, working frantically to contain the damage. "The radiation is cooking our systems," said Technician Oh Sungwoo, his face covered in sweat. "We were not built for this." "Then we will rebuild on the fly," Minji said. She grabbed a plasma welder and began sealing a crack in the coolant system. "Keep the shields up. I do not care how you do it. Just do it." On the bridge, the situation was no better. The view screen showed a wall of asteroids approaching at incredible speed. Taiho's hands flew across his controls, adjusting their course by tiny amounts, threading the needle between rocks that could crush them like insects. "Hard to port," he shouted. The ship rolled, and an asteroid the size of a building passed so close that they could see the cracks in its surface. "Now starboard. Dive, dive." Another asteroid, another near miss. The crew was thrown against their restraints as the ship moved in ways it was never designed to move. First, Officer Choi Hana monitored the situation from her station. Her voice remained calm, even as disaster surrounded them. Hull integrity at 73%. Shield power at 41%. "We are venting atmosphere from Deck 4. "Seal Deck 4, Gino ordered. "Keep moving forward." In the medical bay, Dr. Han Yoonji was preparing for the worst. She was a kind woman with gentle hands, but her eyes held a hardness that came from years of watching people die and refusing to give up. She had been a doctor for 20 years, and she had seen everything done, or so she thought. Now she faced a different challenge. When they reached the Moran ship, she would need to treat thousands of patients. The Moran were not human. Their bodies were different. Their needs were different. She had never treated a Moran in her life. She had 17 hours to become an expert. Yoonji pulled up every medical file she could find about Moran physiology. She studied their anatomy, their chemistry, their common illnesses. She practiced treatment protocols in her mind, again and again, until they became automatic. "Doctor," said Nurse Young Somi, watching her with worried eyes, "you have not slept in 2 days." "I will sleep when those people are safe," Yoonji replied without looking up. "Help me convert Cargo Bay 3 into a medical center." We will need beds for at least 1,000 patients. 1,000? We only have supplies for 30. Yunji finally looked at her. Then we will be creative. Hours passed. The horizon's edge pushed deeper into the nebula, taking damage with every kilometer. Minji worked without rest, running from crisis to crisis, holding the ship together with skill and stubbornness. Taiho navigated by instinct, making decisions in fractions of seconds that saved all their lives. Lieutenant Kim Sora maintained contact with the Moran ship, sending messages of hope through the static. She told them that help was coming. She asked them to hold on just a little longer. The replies grew weaker as time passed. "We're trying," the Moran voice said, barely audible through the interference. "Our oxygen is almost gone. The children they are so scared. Please hurry." Sora wiped tears from her eyes and kept transmitting. "We are coming. Do not give up. We are coming." 48 hours into the journey, the ship nearly died. A gravitational wave hit them without warning, spinning the vessel like a toy. Bulkheads buckled. Systems failed. For a terrible moment, the engines went silent, and the horizon's edge drifted helplessly toward a radiation storm that would kill them all. Minji was hanging from a broken catwalk when it happened. She had been repairing a secondary power line when the wave hit, and now she dangled over a drop that would break her body on the deck below. Her fingers screamed with pain as she held on. She could let go. She could give up. The ship was dying anyway, and there was nothing she could do to save it. But then she thought about the children on the Moran ship. She thought about their parents, holding them close as the air grew thin. She thought about what it meant to be human, to refuse to surrender even when hope was gone. Minji pulled herself up, inch by painful inch, until she reached the catwalk. Then she crawled to the nearest power junction and began to work. "Come on, you beautiful old ship," she whispered through gritted teeth. "Come on, we are not done yet." 5 minutes later, the engines roared back to life. The horizon's edge pulled away from the radiation storm and continued on its path. 72 hours after entering the Valin Nebula, the ship emerged on the other side. The hull was blackened and cracked. Half the systems were damaged or destroyed. The crew was exhausted beyond measure, running on nothing but determination and hope. But there, floating dead in space, was the Moran colony ship. Jin looked at it on the view screen. It was a huge vessel, designed to carry thousands of people across the stars to a new home. Now it was dark and silent, its engines cold, its hull scarred by the same forces that had nearly killed the horizon's edge. "Life signs?" The S.SOR had checked her instruments. Her voice trembled when she answered. 12,347. "They are still alive, Captain. All of them." Gino closed his eyes and let out a breath he'd been holding for 3 days. "Prepare for docking," he said. "Let us bring them home." The stars had always been cold. Captain Park Gino had learned this truth during his 20 years in space. The universe did not care about the small creatures that lived on tiny planets. It did not care about their hopes or their fears. It simply existed, vast and empty and silent. But Gino had also learned something else. Even in the coldness of space, warmth could exist. It lived in the hearts of those who refused to accept the darkness. The research vessel Horizon's Edge was a small ship. It was not a warship. It was not fast or powerful. It carried 32 crew members and enough supplies for 6 months of deep space exploration. On this particular night, the ship was traveling through a quiet sector of space, far from the busy trade routes and the great civilizations. Gino sat in his captain's chair, watching the stars pass by on the main screen. He was a man of 53 years, with gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from too many years of difficult decisions. His uniform was simple and worn. He had never cared much for appearances. Lieutenant Kim Sora sat at the communication station, her fingers moving across the controls with practiced ease. She was young, only 28, but she had a gift for languages that few could match. She could speak 17 alien languages and understand dozens more. Her dark hair was tied back in a practical knot, and her eyes were focused on her screens. The night shift was always quiet. Most of the crew was sleeping. The ship moved through space on automatic systems, its engines humming softly. Everything was peaceful. Then Sora's screens lit up with an incoming signal. She frowned and adjusted her equipment. The signal was weak and broken. It was coming from far away, from a region of space that most ships avoided. The Valin Nebula was a dangerous place, full of radiation storms and gravitational traps. No sane captain would take a ship there. "Captain," Sora said, her voice cutting through the quiet of the bridge. "I am receiving something. A transmission." Gino turned his chair toward her. "What kind of transmission?" I think it is a distress call, sir." The words hung in the air like a cold wind. A distress call. Someone was in trouble. Someone needed help. "Can you clean up the signal?" Gino asked .SOR and nodded and worked her controls. The static cleared slowly, and a voice emerged from the speakers. It was not a human voice. It was higher, softer, with a musical quality that marked it as Myran. The Moran were a peaceful species, known for their art and their philosophy. They had no weapons, no military. They were travelers and thinkers. The voice spoke in broken phrases, filled with fear and desperation. Systems failing. Life support damaged. 12,000 souls aboard. Children. So many children. Oxygen running out. Please. Anyone. We are in the Valin Nebula. Please help us. We do not want to die. The message repeated over and over, a loop of suffering broadcast into the emptiness of space. Jino felt his chest tighten. 12,000 souls. Children. Dying slowly in the dark. Their air running out breath by breath. First Officer Choi Hana entered the bridge. She had heard the alert from her quarters and had come quickly. She was a tall woman with sharp features and sharper eyes. She had served with Gino for 8 years, and she knew him better than anyone. "I heard the transmission," she said simply. Gino nodded. "The Moran colony ship. They are trapped in the Valin Nebula." "The nebula is a death trap," Hana said. Her voice was flat, stating a fact. Radiation storms. Gravitational anomalies. Uncharted asteroid fields. No ship has ever crossed it successfully. I know. If we go in there, we might not come out. I know that too. Sora looked up from her station. "Captain, I am receiving another transmission. It is from the Galactic Council." The Galactic Council was the governing body of known space. It was made up of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. They made the laws. They decided what was allowed and what was forbidden. And they looked down on humans as children, as newcomers who had only discovered faster than light travel 40 years ago. The Council's message was formal and cold. Regarding the distress signal from Moran Vessel Designation 774. The Galactic Council has determined that rescue operations in the Valin Nebula are strategically inadvisable. The region is too dangerous and too close to hostile territory. No assistance will be provided. All vessels are advised to maintain current courses and avoid the affected area. The message ended. That was it. A death sentence delivered in bureaucratic language. 12,000 people would die, and the galaxy would do nothing. Sora's hands were shaking. She was young, and she had not yet learned to hide her emotions. They are just going to let them die? All those people? The children? Hannah's face was like stone. The council has made their decision, but they could save them. They have ships. They have resources. They have decided it is not worth the risk. Gino stood up from his chair. He walked to the main view screen and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the swirling chaos of the Vulcan Nebula, thousands of innocent beings were counting their final breaths. They had sent their cry for help into the universe, hoping that someone would hear, hoping that someone would care. The council did not care. The ancient races did not care. The galaxy was vast and cold, and it had no room for compassion. But Gino was not the galaxy. He was just one man, on one small ship, with 32 people who had chosen to follow him into the darkness. He could not save everyone. He could not change the universe. But he could choose what kind of man he wanted to be. He thought about his daughter back on Earth. She was 12 years old, the same age as some of the children on that Moran ship. He thought about what he would want someone to do if she were the one trapped in the dark, calling for help. The answer was simple. "Helm," Gino said, his voice steady. "Set course for the Vulcan Nebula. Maximum speed." The bridge went silent. Every officer stared at him. Navigator Yoon Taiho, a young man with messy hair and bright eyes, spoke first. "Sir, the nebula is... No one has ever..." "I know what the nebula is," Gino said. "I know the risks. Anyone who wants to leave can take an escape pod. No one will think less of you. But I am going to try to save those people." No one moved toward the escape pods. Hannah stepped forward and stood beside him. "You heard the captain. Set the course." Taiho's fingers moved across his controls. "Course plotted, sir. We will reach the edge of the nebula in 14 hours. Sora sent a message back to Earth, informing the human government of their decision. She also sent a message to the Moran ship, letting them know that help was coming. "Tell them to hold on," Gino said. "Tell them we are coming." As the horizon's edge changed direction and accelerated toward the most dangerous region of space, the crew began to prepare. They did not know if they would survive. They did not know if they could save anyone. But they knew one thing with absolute certainty. Someone had called for help, and humans always answered.